You're listening to Radio IMCLA and the Community Voices Project, produced in association with Kill Radio. Today's program is Inside Facts. Families to Amend California's Three Strikes Law, FACTS, is a statewide organization working to amend the current Three Strikes Law. Because nearly 75% of second and 50% of third strikes within California are for nonviolent offenses, FACTS advocates that the law be amended to apply only to violent felonies. The following are excerpts from a recent FACTS conference held in Los Angeles. Our first speaker is Dennis Duncan, president of LA FACTS.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to see you here. My name is Dennis Duncan, and I am president of the Los Angeles chapter of FACTS. And I've been asked to give you a brief history or background of the organization. And it's a little bit difficult to do with an organization that has progressed as far as FACTS has in the years that I've been associated with it. But I'll try to do my best. FACTS, working against the Three Strikes Law, has been active since the inception of the Three Strikes Law in 1994. It was an outgrowth of an organization called Mother's Rock, and Jerry Silva, who will speak to us later on, was one of the co-founders of FACTS. When I started with FACTS, we met in a small room that was donated by Holman Methodist Church, and at that time there were only 9 people there. At this point in time, and at that time, I believe there were only 2 chapters, Orange County and Los Angeles. In the 4 years that I've been a part of FACTS, we have grown tremendously. We now have 8 chapters throughout the state of California. We have 2 in Orange County. We have the Los Angeles chapter. We have a chapter in San Diego and in Sacramento. Part of our theme in getting the Three Strikes Law amended is to get out and educate and inform people. And I believe that we've been very successful in doing that over the years. There's a large machine out there that has a lot of disinformation going on about what's happening with the Three Strikes Law and crime in the state of California itself. In fact, when the Three Strikes Law was passed in 1994, there had already been a significant decrease in violent crime throughout the state of California. And when it doesn't affect you, you don't pay attention to what's going on. Well, we're here to try to shake you up and let you know that people are being affected by this, and some people are really suffering tremendously from the effects of the Three Strikes Law. You see somebody who gets locked up for 25 years to life on a parole violation. That's ridiculous. I mean, the thing with Kessa and the pizza box and the little pizza emblem that you got on your invitations for this event showed that one of the very first 3 strikes cases was for somebody that stole a slice of pizza, and they got 25 years to life, and that's ridiculous. So that's the sort of thing that we're fighting for, and fighting to get the information out and what FACTS is all about. And we're standing on the forefront of accomplishing that task. We've made tremendous advances in the years that I've been with FACTS, and we look forward to progressing positively towards the realization of our goal. And with your help and the help of those people concerned and those in the FACTS organization right now, I'm sure that we're going to achieve that goal.
You're listening to Inside Facts on Radio IMCLA. Next, we'll hear from Joe Class, author and activist.
You know, it's very easy. There's so many ramifications of all this. I'm Polly Class's grandfather, and it's sometimes even I think of her as my daughter.
Oh, sorry.
But and 2 years ago, I think this is kind of important, and I'm not trying to put you down. But I think in order to understand the facts of the politics in Sacramento and why the legislative process simply will not work, I mean, it's impossible. And every legislature up there will tell you that. Even those, and most of them, would like to see the Three Strikes Law changed, but there aren't enough for 2/3. But 2 years ago, when we went up there to support Senator Vasconcellos' bill to make an economic study or a fiscal study of the effectiveness of the three strikes bill, it was Governor Earl. It passed both the Senate and the legislature. So we know that we can pass a bill if the governor will sign it. And I'm a Democrat all my life. And I was horrified when the bill passed both the Senate and the legislature, and it was vetoed by my own governor, Earl Gray. Not Pete Wilson, he was gone. Earl Gray, what am I saying? Gray Davis. Who the hell's Earl Gray? There is one somewhere.
Makes tea.
Gray Davis. And I was horrified, and I immediately embarked on some research to try and find out why on earth would he do such a thing. And I discovered that he had accepted a $2 million campaign contribution, the biggest campaign contribution, I believe, in the history of America, from the Prison Guards Union. And when I heard recently Bill Jones, the so-called author of the Three Strikes Bill, which was actually written by the National Rifle Association to take the emphasis off gun control and put it on punishment. They wrote it. Mike Reynolds, whose daughter was shot with a .357 Magnum, the next morning called on the National Rifle Association, in which he was a strong member, for help, and they came up with the three strikes idea. And 2 days after that, the murder of his daughter, whom Mike still says was only a purse snatcher, because on a motorcycle he grabbed her purse, and when she hung on to it, he shot her with a .357 Magnum. But 2 days later, the cops filled him full of holes, and he was dead. And Mike says, if there'd been the Three Strikes Bill, that man would never have been on the streets. So what I'm saying is that there's a great deal of misunderstanding about the reality of this thing. Waiting until 2004, I'm opposed to. Because in 2004, Governor Gray Davis will be running against Bill Jones. And I've been up to Sacramento a lot recently and talked to 16 different legislative offices, all of whom would like to support an amendment, but no, there's no use because it'll be vetoed. And I've asked them, well, if Bill Jones and Gray Davis both run for governor, which one gets the $2 million? And without batting an eye, every single one of them said both of them. So the one that doesn't take it gives the other guy a $2 million advantage. So forget about that, folks. Because no matter who gets elected governor, it isn't going to get signed. So what do we have to do? We'll have two governors running supporting the Three Strikes Bill. Two candidates. At least. God knows how many more will get a couple of million each. Because the Prison Guards Union is the biggest union in the state of California and the biggest lobby, cash lobby in the state of California. And I'm not talking about the guards. I know a lot of guards. I've never met a guard that isn't for amending three strikes. But the union gets bigger and bigger the more guards they are. And they have to keep building prisons and filling them up any way they can fill them, and they don't give a damn how it's done or who gets stuck with it, and we know who gets stuck with it. Thousands and thousands of nonviolent people serving terrible, long, long sentences. So I joined the coalition against violent crime because we're for strengthening the laws against violent crime, particularly against rapists of children, in an initiative, while at the same time eliminating all nonviolent crime from the initiative, all nonviolent crime, and letting them have the normal sentences they used to get, again, and also returning the 58,000 people, or whatever it is now, it keeps getting bigger, in prison, who are serving sentences for nonviolent crime, anywhere from 10, 15, 25 to 125 years to life. For things like a fellow in San Diego got 25 years to life for making a false statement on an application for a real estate loan. Think about that the next time you make out your income tax. So what I'm saying is, we've got to get it done. And the only way we can get it done is to write the initiative. The initiative is written. Facts and other people have been asked to submit any changes they want in it. But we need a poll. We need a poll to find out what will not pass and get that out of it. We might sacrifice some little thing, but we want to get those people out of prison, don't we? And we'll get them all out if it passes. Because the bill will contain remanding the cases on hand, the ones that are in there, back to the judge that sentenced them in the first place, the judge who had no discretion whatsoever, because only the district attorney has the discretion to call a strike. The judge hasn't got anything to do with it. And if it goes back to the judge and he gets a chance to use his judicial judgment, I think almost all of these people will be released. The immediate saving, aside from the families it will save, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, the mothers, the sons and the daughters that are put away, more of them being put away than Hitler put away, you know. Innocent people, or not innocent people, but innocent of any kind of a crime that requires such a sentence. We'll get them back. We'll save these homes. And I know the people here are interested in that. And I feel for you all. I really do. Because the campaign for 3 strikes, I was not a proponent of it. I was for it. But a proponent is someone who signs on to the bill as a proponent. I'm a proponent of this initiative. It's the only initiative I'm a proponent of. I endorsed Prop 36, which keeps many people from having a strike called on them for possession of drugs. Instead gives them a chance to go to rehabilitation courses ranging anywhere from a year to 18 months, and if they complete the courses, having this felony stricken from their record. I'm an endorser of that, but I was, and we passed it. And like it was just said, a lot of people misunderstood and thought, well, that straightens out the 3 strikes bill. It doesn't straighten out for the guy that got caught with a slice of pizza, or the kid who took a bicycle from somebody's garage. You know, it doesn't do that. But it does give a chance to first-time offenders, people that are caught with possession of a half an ounce or more of any controlled substance without a prescription. Boy, that isn't much, is it? I never could understand how we can call drug addiction a disease, but possession of it a felony. How in the hell can you be addicted to something and not have possession of it? But that's the way the law is. And it's a strike for the people that are already in there. And a lot of them are in there for that. A lot of men. Prop 36 was not retroactive. They can't get out. They can't get the rehabilitation that people today are getting. We've got to do a lot. We've got to do a lot. The bill was passed. It was kicked off as the kickoff campaign for a governor with the lowest popular rating in the polls in the history of any governor of this state. And he kicked it off at the memorial of my granddaughter, Polly Klass. We were told that day, my old radio station, the one I retired from, KGO, the biggest station in Northern California, They thought they were doing me a favor. They came up there with Mike Reynolds and all these petitions. And I was on my friend Ron Owen's talk show that morning, and I learned about this thing, and I was told if this had been in effect, Richard Allen Davis would not have been released from prison. That was good enough for me without analyzing it. I was in solid grief. The night before, or about 4 nights before, they'd found my granddaughter's body flung out into a toxic dump in Cloverdale by this monster. So naturally I went for it. And then 2 months later, when I calmed down a little bit, I'm an old journalist, and I used to cover courts, and I decided to read the damn thing. And in all that time, I never once heard anyone ever mention that strikes could be called on people for offenses, petty crimes. Second and third strikes can be misdemeanors that are raised to the level of a felony. Misdemeanors, 25 years to life. And that's what most of them are. I was horrified when I read it and saw serious crimes, and I wasn't quite sure. We looked it up with a reporter from the Argus. He and I looked it up there in a little quiet room in Petaluma. And I said, let's call the legislative analyst and ask if we're reading what is the real truth here. And he told us in no uncertain terms what it represented. And I was opposed to it. I told my son, and he thought I was getting soft on crime, and he hit his desk so hard he broke it. I mean, he broke the top in. And a couple of days later, he calmed down the night before the crime summit in Southern California, in Los Angeles. And he decided to oppose it. And he told the governor he was going to oppose it. And the governor said, Mark, you don't know how the victims feel. So help me God, that's what he said. And Mike Reynolds on camera said, well, Polly can't help who her father is. And then later in a documentary most of you have seen, he said the 3 strikes bill didn't stand a chance. It was failing until they got a lucky break, the kidnapping and murder of Polly Klaas. We got to whip this thing. We need $35,000 to take a poll, or we get nowhere, because we can't raise money until we find out what the feelings of the people are. And from what happened to Prop 36 and the people I've talked to from one end of the state to the other, I think the majority of the people would like to get the nonviolent crimes out of the 3 strikes bill. The liberals, they want justice. The far right, they want to save $1 billion in prison construction next year. And they want to save $1 billion a year after that for the maintenance of prisoners who never did anything violent in their lives. So let's raise the money, shall we? Thank you.
You are listening to Inside Facts on Radio IMC LA. Our next speaker is Ruthie Gilmore, Associate Professor, UC Berkeley.
Good afternoon. Good. Thank you, Wally, for that over-the-top introduction. It's very nice and very inspiring. And I want to thank both of you, first of all, for having us here in your beautiful garden this afternoon. I've been reading the poem that's in wrought iron over on the side wall there. And I do believe it's true that your heart will not harden if you can spend time in a beautiful garden. We certainly live in an era when the hardening of hearts has shaped the life chances of many poor people in urban and rural settings throughout the United States. The expansion of criminalization in the United States, and by criminalization I mean both the kinds of laws that three strikes represents, that is, laws that add time to crimes that were already on the books, and the criminalization of behavior that once upon a time was not considered a crime, has organized many, many people, modestly educated men and women, who once would have made their livings making, moving, growing, and caring for things, into cells throughout the United States. There are 2 million people in prison and jail in the United States. That doesn't count such things as INS detention centers and other cages. So these are only people who have been either convicted of some kind of crime or who are being held pending trial. What's happened in the last 20 years is that prisons have become a geographical solution, an all-purpose geographical solution, a catch-all geographical solution for a widening array of social, political, economic problems. And prisons have been organized by different levels of the state, by counties, by states, and by the federal government, in order to fill in a gap that once upon a time was filled, not perfectly, but somewhat well, by social service programs that we all know have been dismantled. So I'm not only talking about such programs as welfare or aid to families with dependent children, but other kinds of social service programs that gave modestly educated people, particularly young people, a chance to enter the workforce, to become trained for some kind of productive life, and so forth. Now, here in California, between 1852 and 1982, California built 12 prisons. 12. All right? 130 years, 12 prisons. Oldest one is San Quentin. It's still open and operating. They've never decommissioned a prison in this state. Since 1982, so from 1982 to the present, California has built 23 prisons. In 1982, there were about 30,000 people in prison in the state. Today, there are 161,000 people in prison in the state, men and women. This doesn't count the 10,000 or so in the Youth Authority. And I'm not counting people who are in jails, in county jails. That would bring the total to about 250,000 people. Now, the cost of these prisons, just the dollar outlay, as Joe Class was talking about, for construction and operation. All right, construction, $2.5 billion to build them, and another $2.5 billion for debt service. So that's $5 billion. Operation, the current budget for the California Department of Corrections is pushing $5 billion a year. That's for operation. Most of the cost of operation is payroll, as is true for any business, and most of the payroll is for custody staff, i.e. prison guards, and Joe talked about the guard union. Where are these prisons? They're obviously not here in Los Angeles. They're mostly in the Central Valley and in other agricultural resource extraction areas in the state. So there's a rather dense concentration of prisons up and down the southern San Joaquin Valley, and actually stretching as far north as Sacramento. There's a line of prisons that stretch from Donovan, which is south of San Diego, in the west, up around to Blythe, which is in eastern Riverside County, to the east. And there are a couple of prisons in far north California, one in Del Norte County, which is just south of the Oregon border in the northwest corner of the state, and a few in Lassen County. These prisons are, everyone, located in what I call the other California. It's the California that did not benefit from the economic boom that this state enjoyed until very recently. It's the California where the average household income is, in some cases, as little as 1/4 the statewide average household income. It's the California where towns experience as high as 30 to 40% unemployment rates. In short, it's a California that's very much like a California where many prisoners come from. The urban California that's been deeply deindustrialized, the urban California that's been so destabilized by changes in labor market structure, in possibilities for economic development, in the mix of jobs available to modestly educated men and women of all ages, that unemployment runs very high in such areas as well. Now, I know from research and I know from experience that not every single person who is in prison is poor, but most people are. How do we know this? We know this, for example, because 80% of prisoners in this state have been, at one time or another, represented by legal counsel that is reserved for the indigent, right? So we know that they're poor. We know that approximately 52% of people who were sent to prison in this state in the last 5 years had moved from employment to employment in the prior year, while the balance, about 48%, had in fact had steady work for the year before they went to prison. And steady work means you work for one employer for 1 year, definition. All right. So what prison represents in this state is a transfer of very meager wealth between poor places. Very meager wealth. Prison towns are not getting rich. The poor people in prison towns don't get the good jobs at prisons. In fact, they hardly get any jobs at all in the prisons that come to dominate their landscapes. Meanwhile, people who are removed from urban communities where most prisoners come from take with them, not voluntarily, but because of the mere fact of their removal from the community and relocation in another place, they take with them tax subventions. What's that? The allocation of funds from the state's general coffers that are sent out to communities throughout the state on a per capita basis. So when prisoners are moved from Los Angeles to Corcoran, the city of Corcoran and the county of Kings get money that otherwise would have come to Los Angeles because there are prisoners in prison there, even though the city of Corcoran and the county of Kings provides no social services for these prisoners, right? So it's a little bit of gravy for desperate towns, right? And the removal of a meager income stream from urban areas. Now, I've painted a rather bleak picture, and I'd like to change my tone and tune a little bit because I could not do what I do if I didn't feel some hope for the future. And the most hopeful thing that's happened in this state in the last couple of years has been the passage of Proposition 36. I won't go into any details about it other than to bring to your attention this one fact. If you look at a map of the counties of this state and look at which counties voted for Proposition 36 and which counties voted against Proposition 36, you will see that counties where the new prisons have gone have tended pretty much, almost 100%, to vote against Proposition 36. And other counties, including counties with those old prisons, those pre-1982 prisons, voted for Proposition 36. And when I saw this map, I thought, oh gosh, what does this mean? Does it mean that the people in the new prison counties are without restraint for the criminalization of everything? My research and my activism on the ground tell me that's not the case. I do know that the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, which is to say the guards union, has made it part of their political program to do what they call secure the Central Valley. And they campaign mightily in the Valley and in those other counties against Proposition 36. They campaign, in other words, in their bread and butter counties against that change in the law. The work that I've done with facts, with critical resistance, with the California Prison Moratorium Project, shows that ordinary folks who live in these counties have a different perspective. Their perspective is one that's based in a really passionate desire for economic justice. Their perspective is based in one that wishes to turn the tide for people who are from somewhere else, let us say Los Angeles, so that their communities can develop with some project other than a prison. Or as one person put it to me, I don't see why my dream as a mother for a secure future for my child should be secured at the expense of another mother's nightmare. I don't see why my dream comes at the expense of another mother's nightmare. I believe that the Three Strikes poll could not only show us where an initiative could go, but I think it could do a lot more basic work than that. And that is a poll and the kind of publicity that goes along with polls and the chance to speak more broadly to all kinds of ordinary people who have a great deal of decency in their hearts. That such a poll could enable us to get people like the people I talk to in California's Central Valley, and that my partner talks to up in Lassen County in the Hurlong area, and down in Imperial County, to, well, if you will, have the courage of their convictions. And to start thinking again, not only about what their individual views are concerning surplus criminalization of people like themselves, but also what can be done to change this. In fact, I think it is exactly the possibility that people can recognize themselves in them, in the folks who are on the other side of the inside-outside prison line, is perhaps the most hopeful thing that we have going for us today in these days that seem quite hopeless. The other thing I want to say, too, is I think that what we can do in trying to craft the initiative well is produce voters. So instead of thinking only about the 40% or so who always vote, is to think about the other 60% who don't and think, well, what might bring some people out to the polls? Now, when Tom Bradley was defeated his first time around back by George Duke Machen in the early 80s, unfortunately what brought people out and probably tipped the balance against Bradley was that gun control bill. And there was, an unprecedented number of people who voted against it, and more people voted against it than voted for either of the two chief gubernatorial candidates. Maybe there's something that we could do that, again, would produce voters, remind people that they have some power that they can exercise in the polling place. We still have the problem, and it really is a problem, of how people think about this stuff. And that's what we don't know. We really don't. I mean, I'm a teacher. I teach all day, every day. I teach, the cream of the crop at UC Berkeley. And it's always interesting to me, every class is different. It's always interesting to me to figure out how the young people I'm teaching, and how older people also I'm teaching, sort of go through the thought process, what they take as common sense, what they take as shocking, what they take as, a way that they can arrive at certain kinds of conclusions in order to do the learning that I demand of them. And that, I think, is the problem here. Rather than that we need a poll that would simply ask people, do you agree that somebody who steals a piece of pizza should be sent away for 25 to life, yes or no? That's easy. It's the stuff in between. It's the more complicated stuff. It's the sort of how to do the campaigning stuff. I think that's more difficult. I can tell you this. Cost-benefit analysis doesn't move anybody. We've been saying over and over and over again for years and years and years that throwing somebody in prison is extremely expensive and not productive. And it doesn't make any difference. In fact, voters in this state don't necessarily connect cost with criminalization. And I'll give you an example. Voters in this state since 1990 have consistently voted against bond issues designed to build new prisons. since 1990. Voters have said no on 3 occasions. And yet they've also consistently voted for, until Proposition 36, laws that expand criminalization. Right? So the cost-benefit analysis is not the way we get by this enormous impasse. And in fact, I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Because what FACTS is a gift to the members of FACTS and a gift to the rest of us in the community of Californians who seek justice. And it really is a gift economy that we need here, rather than an economy in which cost and benefits and thinking about maximizing utilities is what moves us. I think what ought to move us is the sense of how connected we really are, rather than how disconnected we feel that we have become. I want to thank all of you for coming out today, for hearing us out, for thinking about reaching into your pockets and looking into your hearts to help us take this next step toward undoing an enormous justice in this land. And I want to say one final thing. Dennis said earlier that 3 strikes passed in the wake of significant declines in crime in this state. Well, not only is that true, it's also true that the entire prison expansion program that kicked off in 1982 began in the wake of a 2-year, well-reported decline in crime in this state. Page 1. I encourage you to go look at old copies of the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Sacramento Bee, Fresno Bee, and so forth. Right? Crime was going down before the prisons started to go up, 1, and 2, the laws like 3 strikes that have passed to fill the prisons passed after, not before, the prisons were built. After, not before, the prisons were built. Right? And that order of things, which is quite counterintuitive, I think, again, ought to tell us something about a kind of political opportunism that has now all of us in its grasp. And I think, again, that we can undo it with the resources, the care and resources that we have available to us this afternoon, and with communities like this throughout the state. Thanks a lot. Hi.
Yes, what I'd like to know is what force does the labor, the prison labor unit present to us? In other words, they are a group, the prisoners are a group that can be used for labor in producing products. Mm-hmm. And what part does that have in keeping the prisons strong?
Okay, the question is what role does prisoners' labor play in the political acceptability and the economic strength of prisons? Is that fair? Okay. Not much. Not much, surprisingly. Although there is a lot of discussion, and I think for good reason, a lot of discussion about the fact that prisoners are the only people in the United States whose labor can be taken from them without compensation, i.e., slavery was abolished in all cases except for those who have been duly convicted of crimes. Right? That prisoners' labor must be an important piece of the puzzle. The fact is that here in California, prisoners, very, very, very few prisoners work for profit-making enterprises. I mean, fewer than 400 of the 161,000 prisoners are working in the working for profit-making enterprises. And there's a long explanation for that, which I'd be happy to share with you afterward. Prisoners, however, in California do work for the publicly owned and operated Prison Industries Authority. And that authority is supposed to bring revenue to the prison system, but it is constrained by law from competing with external profit-making enterprises in particular ways. Therefore, basically what we have is a bookkeeping game where the prisoners make products. Those products are sold to other state agencies. So there's an exchange, right, on the books. And you know, the cant about it is that the prisoners are therefore paying their own way. Well, they're not really, because all of the money that circulates in this exchange comes from a single general fund. But anyway, so that's a long answer to your question, how important is prisoner labor? In this state, not very important at all. And actually in most states, not very important at all. Even in places like Texas, where there's a fairly high participation of prisoners in profit-making enterprises. Yeah?
And what is driving this impetus forward? I mean, I guess when you were talking about these distressed communities where the prisons exist, I really thought you were going to say, well, then it brings a lot of money and jobs into these communities. So then what is the benefit? It's obviously money, but who's benefiting?
Okay, who's benefiting? Well, there are two kinds of benefits. There's money benefit and there's politics benefit, right? And the political profit that all kinds of would-be office seekers or people trying not to lose elected office or lose appointed office has been enormous in the last 20 years. Joe talked about that very eloquently. People who once upon a time might have run for public office on the basis that what the state ought to do for its citizenry is provide protections from calamity and opportunities for advancement, have since the early 80s run one against the big state. Everybody does it, Democrat and Republican. And on the other hand say, but what the state ought to do is provide defense, whether it's international or domestic, and the way we do it domestically is through criminalization and imprisonment, right? That's something people can get elected and reelected on. So the political profit is there regardless of whether money changes hands. Economically, well, there's the Guards Union, 29,000 people, with a huge and hugely powerful superstructure, so that many rank and file COs, corrections officers, don't participate in the decision-making process of that union, and yet the union has, as Joe said, enormous clout in Sacramento. Enormous clout. Their checkbooks direct policy. Who else? All kinds of people. There are investment bankers who underwrite the bonds which are sold to build the prisons. And in fact, it was a very, very, very smart investment banker, a person I had worked with years ago on college facilities financing, who came up with the idea that it would be possible to use lease revenue bonds rather than general obligation bonds to build prisons in this state. And his view was, sooner or later the voters are going to stop approving these bonds, but they will continue to approve the expansion of prisons. Therefore, we need a way to finance construction of prisons that doesn't go to the voters who are going to say no. Lease revenue bonds was the answer. Who else? Construction companies, vendors, and so forth. But it still isn't those little towns. Not at all. Yeah?
I don't have a question, but I have a suggestion.
Okay.
Is that okay? Why don't you think of this strategy, which would be more direct, to take money out of campaigns?
Well, the gentleman said, what about campaign finance reform? And if the Guards couldn't throw their clout around with their checkbook, wouldn't we be living in a different world? Yes, we would. But that, even changing campaign finance reform is not going to undo the harms that this law has done. And the question before us is, how do we undo the harms that this law has already done? One, and two, how can we, for example, connect the harms that this law has done as palpable evidence of the evils of current campaign financing?
Well,
Maybe what we need to do is join forces here rather than say let's do one rather than the other. But I also want to say that we're in a bind now that we really need to figure out how to get out of. And the bind is that people think the way they do about the way California works, about what prisons are for, and so forth. And it's the really complicated work of undoing that thinking, undoing the assumptions that prisons provide community safety and security, is what the problem is truly before us, right? It's not only about the corruption over there, it's about how the corruption is rolled through the entire society. and rotted out, I think, our social fabric. Yeah?
Has any other state followed us down this really unfortunate road, or are we the only state with the three strikes?
Okay, the question is, has any other state followed us down this road? The answer is, 28 states, I think, have three strikes laws. Nobody's is like ours. Washington State passed the very first three strikes law in 1992 or 1993, and there are fewer than 200 people in their entire state prison system who've gone away on third strikes. In all cases, all of the strikes are violent crimes. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
That was Ruthie Gilmore, Associate Professor at UC Berkeley, author and leading scholar on the prison industrial complex. You've been listening to Inside Facts on Radio IMC LA. To learn more about how you can help to amend California's three strikes law, contact FACTS at 213-746-4844 or check out their website at www.fax1.com. This is Radio IMCLA and the Community Voices Project, produced in association with Kill Radio. You can find us on the web at www.la.indymedia.org and www.killradio.org.